Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the deep dive, where we take your sources, break them down, and extract valuable insights. Our goal is really to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed with some surprising facts and hopefully engaging discussion.
We're here to guide you through the materials you've provided,
Mhm.
helping you grasp what is most significant and, well, why it matters for your understanding, particularly from a Reformed perspective on Scripture.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into the truly fascinating world of seeing in the Hebrew Bible. And let me tell you, it's so much richer than just physical sight.
Mm.
We'll be looking at the Hebrew verb ḥāzâ and its related terms. It's amazing how these ancient words illuminate concepts of divine revelation, prophetic insight, and even, encountering the Most High himself.
We really do have a rich collection of material here. It covers the semantic range of ḥāzâ, its relationship to other words for perception, and crucially, its central place in conveying God's communication with humanity.
Yeah.
As we walk through this, you'll gain, I think, a fresh perspective on how the biblical writers depicted the reception of divine messages. And that's just central to our understanding of God's interaction with his people, his covenant faithfulness.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational verb, ḥāzâ. Now, when we typically think of seeing, our minds go straight to our physical eyes, right? Perceiving something right in front of us.
Right, the obvious meaning.
Exactly. But what our sources highlight is that ḥāzâ carries a much broader meaning. It stretches into areas of perception that go way beyond mere physical observation. This verb, ḥāzâ, it means to see or to behold, but here's the kicker. It's almost entirely poetic in Hebrew. That really sets it apart from the more common everyday verb rāঃ.
Yeah, and that distinction is quite telling, isn't it?
It really is, because rāঃ serves as the basic Hebrew verb for just straightforward, everyday physical seeing. Noticing a tree, seeing a person walk by, simple observation.
Standard stuff.
Right. But ḥāzâ, it conveys a very different sense. It suggests a more deliberate, maybe a more thoughtful or significant act of beholding. It's not a casual glance. It's an intentional gaze, perhaps an act of contemplation.
Like really looking.
Precisely. And you find ḥāzâ used in various contexts that illustrate this kind of nuanced observation.
Right.
For instance, Isaiah 33.17 describes beholding a king in his beauty. It's a vision of splendor. It inspires awe. It's not just recognizing he's there.
Right, there's a quality to the seeing.
Exactly. Or take Psalm 36.25, which invites us to ḥāzâ, the work of God. It's about observing his mighty deeds with, well, a sense of wonder and maybe even apprehension, understanding his sovereignty, even stargazers. Gazing at the stars in Isaiah 47.13, they use this term. It highlights an act of observing with focused attention, maybe searching for patterns rather than just a fleeting look up at the sky.
That distinction with rāঃ is truly illuminating. It gives us, I think, a direct insight into the quality of the seeing involved.
Yeah.
As you said, rāva is the everyday verb, but dosa carries a different feel. Maybe think of it less as just seeing and more like the German verb schauen. It implies a more contemplative, discerning, or significant act of beholding, not just a casual glance.
That's a helpful comparison.
So when ḥāzâ is used, it often signals that there's a heightened significance to the act of seeing. It moves beyond casual observation into something, well, more profound. It sort of prepares the listener or the reader for something beyond the ordinary, hinting at a spiritual or intellectual insight. And that becomes so crucial later on.
Right.
And this isn't just limited to human perception either. Our sources point to a really striking metaphor in Job 8.17. There, ḥāzâ is used to describe the roots of plants perceiving or meeting with stones in the earth.
That's fascinating. Roots don't have eyes.
Exactly. It isn't literal sight for roots, obviously, but it beautifully illustrates how the verb can be applied to experiencing something, even metaphorically, for inanimate objects. It shows a remarkable breadth of meaning for this act of perception.
So it suggests like an intimate encounter, a connection.
I think so. A deep connection with their environment, even without eyes. This example really pushes us to think beyond just typical sensory perception. It suggests seeing can refer to a really deep kind of interaction or experience.
Okay, so that sets the foundation. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This concept of seeing starts to move into an entirely different dimension. ḥāzâ becomes the central verb for how prophets receive messages directly from God.
The revelatory aspect.
Right. It's not just seeing a physical object around them anymore. It's perceiving divine truth. information directly from the Most High, often stuff that is otherwise unknowable to human minds.
Absolutely crucial for understanding prophecy.
The sources clearly show that ḥāzâ is specially used for things presented to the minds of prophets. Whether these are vivid visions, mental images, or profound oracular revelations, just the words themselves. It conveys this concept of receiving unknown information directly from God. It indicates a spiritual insight that just transcends mere human understanding.
Yeah, it's a divine impartation.
And this distinctive usage, it's most clearly seen in those formulaic introductions to the prophetic books. They immediately establish the divine origin of the message, setting the authority right from the start.
You see it right there in verse 1.
Exactly. Like Isaiah 1.1. It begins with Isaiah seeing a vision through the ḥāzâ. This isn't Isaiah just having a clever thought or offering his opinion. It's presented as a direct, divinely given revelation that frames his entire prophetic book. Similarly, Amos 1.1 and Micah 1.1 also use ḥāzâ. They use it to describe the words or the messages they received from the Lord. It's a compelling way to illustrate that these prophets didn't just hear words. They perceived them in a deeply revelatory sense, a profound encounter with God's word itself.
And this reception, it isn't always easy or pleasant, is it? ḥāzâ is also used for seeing a burden or seeing an oracle. You see that in Habakkuk 1.1.
Ah, the burden, yeah.
Imagine the prophet Habakkuk. He sees a burden. This particular phrasing. It really communicates the gravity and often the difficult nature of the divinely given message.
That sounds heavy.
It implies a weighty truth that the prophet is, burdened to deliver. A message that might cause him anguish or challenge his understanding of God's ways, as it certainly did for Habakkuk. He wasn't just observing a problem. He was spiritually experiencing the crushing weight of God's coming judgment.
Wow.
This deep internal perception highlights that receiving divine revelation can be a physically and emotionally taxing experience. It compels the prophet to wrestle with the very nature of God's justice and his sovereign plans for his people.
That adds another layer entirely.
And this specialized use of ḥāzâ, it naturally leads us to the designation man of God, ḥāzâ. Our sources make it clear this is generally a synonym for prophet.
Okay.
These are individuals specifically chosen by God to receive revelation and speak on his behalf. They act as his appointed messengers. They don't speak their own words, but the very words of God himself, faithfully delivered. Throughout the Old Testament, we see figures like Moses, Samuel, David, Elijah, Elisha, Shemaiah, Igdaliah. They're named as men of God. This highlights their unique role as direct recipients and communicators of God's messages. This designation isn't merely a title of respect. It's really a description of their function. They are people through whom God makes himself known to his people, bridging that gap between the divine and the human.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the term seer? Does that connect directly back to ḥāzâ?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The term seer, is a noun directly derived from ḥāzâ, and it further reinforces this understanding.
Oh, okay.
The sources explicitly state that ḥāzâ is synonymous with prophet. It specifically indicates their function of receiving divine revelations. A seer is, by definition, one who sees in this extraordinary revelatory sense, one who experiences and communicates the divine insights given by God.
So it really emphasizes the visual, perceptive aspect.
It does. It brings that to the forefront, the active, almost visual aspect of their revelatory encounters. It emphasizes that their knowledge comes from a direct apprehension of divine truth. So when you encounter the term man of God or seer, you should understand this refers to someone uniquely positioned to perceive and articulate God's will. Their authority derives entirely from this unique ability to see what God is communicating.
Right, their authority isn't their own.
Precisely.
But if this seeing, this ḥāzâ, implies divine truth, what about those who claim to see but don't truly receive divine messages? The sources also talk about a corrupted form of seeing, don't they? Where prophets are described as seeing vain things or falsehood.
Yes, and that's a crucial distinction, because it shows that the true source of the vision matters immensely. It's not enough to simply claim to have seen something. The origin and the content must be authentic, from God.
Okay.
For example, Ezekiel 13.6 and Zechariah 10.2. They explicitly describe false prophets as seeing vain things, the falsehood, ḥāzâ.
Vain things, false.
Exactly. This demonstrates a perception of revelation that is corrupted, not from God. And it highlights the severe consequences of claiming divine insight that isn't truly given. It's a counterfeit seeing, lacking the truth and authority of genuine divine communication. and it inevitably leads people astray.
A dangerous deception.
Very. This distinction is vital for God's people, then and now, to discern between genuine divine revelation, grounded in God's unchanging character and word, and deceptive claims that arise from human imagination or even demonic influence.
Given these variations in seeing, then, it makes sense that there would be different words for vision itself. Can you walk us through the nouns derived from both ḥāzâ and rāʾâ? How do they carry different shades of meaning when talking about divine communication?
Certainly. The specific terms for vision are quite significant. They stem from both ḥāzâ and rāʾâ, but as you say, with distinct nuances that highlight different aspects of divine communication. Let's look at the nouns derived from rāṟâ first. The masculine noun ḥāzâ is directly related to ḥāzâ. It specifically denotes a divine vision or dream, often a prophetic vision concerning future events or maybe general divine revelation. You find it prominently in the titles of prophetic books, like Isaiah 1.1.
Right, we mentioned that one.
Yes, it signals that the entire prophetic utterance is considered a ḥāzôn, comprehensive, divinely given vision that shapes the prophet's entire message. Think of it as the grand, overarching revelation that sets the trajectory for the whole book.
The whole message framework.
Exactly. Then there's ḥāzō. It's a feminine noun meaning vision or revelation, seen in 1 Chronicles 9.29. It seems to be a more general term for an act of seeing a revelation.
Okay.
Another noun is ḥāzōsa. Now this one's interesting. It can mean appearance, but it can also mean a prophetic vision or even a revelation or covenant.
Covenant, how does that connect?
Well, the sources highlight this fascinating link between ḥāzō and covenant. It implies that God's revealed law, or his agreement with his people, is itself a form of seeing for them. Not a visual sight, perhaps, but a clear, revealed truth that becomes the very blueprint of their relationship with him.
Ah, like making his will visible, understandable.
Precisely. A visible manifestation of his will for their lives. This is how God unveils his plan and expectations, making them seen and understood. It connects revelation directly to the covenant relationship.
That's a powerful idea.
We also have ḥāzâ. This is a masculine noun meaning vision, particularly a prophetic vision. It's explicitly linked with ḥāzâ in phrases like see a vision, like in Numbers 24.4 with Balaam. This term often seems to describe a specific, powerful visual encounter within that larger prophetic experience. Almost like seeing a particular scene vividly unfold before the mind's eye.
Like a specific episode within the bigger vision. Something like that. It implies a distinct, defined manifestation of divine communication. And finally, there's ḥāzōn, jifi. This is another noun meaning vision, often conveying the idea of a dream or a night vision. It adds to this rich vocabulary from the root ḥāzâ. While it's similar to ḥāzōn, it might sometimes suggest a more direct, maybe even startling or terrifying visual manifestation within the dream state.
So a whole family of words from ḥāzâ related to these divine visions. Now, how do the nouns from rāʾâ, the more common verb for physical sight, how do they differentiate themselves when they're used for divine communication?
Right. So from rāʾâ, we primarily find two nouns used for vision in the context of divine communication. The first is marsa. This is a feminine noun related to rāʾâ, and it almost exclusively refers to visions given by God to men.
Okay, specifically visions from God. Yes. And what's particularly striking about Mars is its use in Numbers 12, verses 6 through 8. Here, it's used to draw a very important contrast. It contrasts God's direct and unique communication with Moses speaking with him mouth to mouth, clearly, not in riddles with how he says. He typically speaks to other prophets, which is through a vision or a dream.
Ah, highlighting Moses' unique relationship.
Exactly. This passage underscores the truly special nature of Moses' experience as mediator of the covenant. It sets it apart even from the profound revelations received by other prophets. While others might see visions, perhaps in a more indirect or symbolic way, Moses experienced a personal, direct, and uniquely intimate interaction with God himself.
A different category almost.
You could say that. The second noun from rāʾâ is mars. Now, marsi often refers to a physical appearance or a visible phenomenon. Think of the burning bush in Exodus 3.3. That was an actual physical sight, a mars.
Right, something tangible.
But in certain books like Ezekiel and Daniel, marvi also indicates a divine vision, similar to marbur. This shows how a general term for visible things can be elevated in specific contexts to describe profound divine communication.
So the context tells you if it's just appearance or a divine vision.
Precisely. It suggests that sometimes even what appears to be a physical manifestation can carry deep spiritual significance when it's from God. It serves as a divine vision rather than just mere observation. It's about recognizing that God, in his sovereignty, can use the tangible to convey the spiritual. He meets us where we are.
Okay. And we really can't ignore the Aramaic influence, can we? Especially in the book of Daniel, visions and dreams there seem to take on new dimensions, often pointing towards hidden truths, mysteries.
Now, Daniel is key here. Our sources highlight that the Aramaic verb ḥāzâ, which is, cognate to the Hebrew doza, and its derivatives are particularly prominent in Daniel.
Same root, different language context.
Exactly. For instance, duzu is an Aramaic synonym for the Hebrew phizon. It's frequently used for Daniel's visions, like in Daniel 2.19 and 7.1. It repeatedly highlights the direct visual nature of the revelations Daniel received. We also encounter ozev, that's another Aramaic masculine noun for vision. It appears in Daniel 2.28 and other places to describe what Daniel perceived.
Okay.
And in addition to visions, you have thumb, that's the Aramaic term for dream. It often appears right alongside visions, underscoring the significance of both as mediums for divine communication in that book.
Right. Daniel interprets both Nebuchadnezzar's dream and his own visions.
Precisely. And Daniel's exceptional ability to understand these divine revelations, both visions and dreams, is frequently mentioned. It emphasizes a divinely granted capacity, a gift of the Spirit, to comprehend these forms of revelation, especially when they were so cryptic to others, like the Babylonian wise men.
But it wasn't just about understanding the content, was it? Daniel's role often involved uncovering what was hidden, these divine secrets.
That's exactly where rāʻâ comes into play. And it's a vital term for understanding Daniel's experiences, especially in chapter 2. This Aramaic term, used exclusively in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, means secret or mystery.
Mystery, okay?
It refers specifically to divine secrets or hidden knowledge that are revealed by God, often through these very dreams and visions. Daniel's God-given ability to interpret these mysteries, these rāzīn, shows how divine perception, through terms like ḥāzâ and its Aramaic counterparts, involves unlocking truths that are otherwise completely concealed from human understanding.
So seeing leads to knowing secrets.
In this context, yes. It's about God making known what was previously hidden, giving insight into his sovereign plans and purposes, things completely inaccessible to human reason alone. Daniel wasn't just seeing images. He was discerning the very secrets of the Most High God regarding the future of kingdoms and ultimately the coming of God's own kingdom.
Wow, okay. So we've covered the prophetic and revelatory aspects quite a bit. But ḥāzâ also describes other fascinating aspects of perception, stretching beyond literal sight. How do the sources describe seeing God using this particular verb?
Yeah, that's another profound area. Our sources tell us that ḥāzâ is used often poetically to describe seeing God. Now, this can mean a very direct, real sight of the divine presence. Surprisingly, as described in Exodus 24.11, where certain elders of Israel are said to have seen the God of Israel and yet lived.
Which seems to contradict other passages.
It does, which suggests a unique, divinely enabled encounter. Not necessarily a full apprehension of God's infinite essence, which no creature can have, but a real, perhaps mediated or veiled manifestation of his presence that these individuals were privileged by grace to experience without being consumed.
A specific, gracious revealing.
Right. Or Derrida can refer to a future post-mortem vision of God. Think as Job 19.26-27. Job anticipates seeing God even after his skin is destroyed apart from his flesh. This speaks of a future hope, grounded in his Redeemer, a spiritual side of God that transcends the physical limitations and decay of mortal existence.
The believer's ultimate hope.
Absolutely.
And what about that phrase, beholding the face of God? That sounds incredibly intimate. How does ḥāzâ relate there?
It does sound intimate, and that idea of seeing God extending beyond the purely physical or taking on a metaphorical sense is crucial for understanding passages like that. The phrase, to behold the face of God, found in places like Psalm 11.7 and Psalm 17.1, isn't necessarily about a literal physical sight of God's face.
Okay, so metaphorical.
Often, yes. Instead, it serves as a compelling metaphor for enjoying God's favor, his presence, his blessing, or knowing him as propitious, meaning favorably disposed towards you, showing his goodwill.
Like being welcomed into his presence.
Exactly. The imagery is likely drawn from the custom of ancient Near Eastern kings who would only admit favored individuals into their direct presence, allowing them to see the king's face as a sign of acceptance and favor. So it highlights the relational aspect of seeing God, emphasizing intimacy, approval, and a privileged access that goes far beyond simple observation. It speaks to a deep personal relationship where God's loving favor is evident and enjoyed.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this concept of seeing extending beyond the physical, it definitely carries into intellectual and experiential perception too.
How so? Intellectual perception.
Yes, for intellectual perception, ḥāzâ can mean perceive with the intelligence or simply to understand. This means grasping a matter mentally. For example, in Proverbs 24.32, the wise observer sees or perceives the results of foolish choices, laziness leading to poverty. He understands the cause and effect.
Ah, observing and learning.
Right. Or it can mean perceiving God's providential workings in the world. Psalm 46.9 invites us to come behold the works of the Lord, specifically the desolations he brings about. It's about understanding these events as part of his sovereign rule and ultimate redemptive plan. So seeing in this context is a form of deep mental comprehension, an inner discernment of truth, often about God's ways that isn't dependent on physical eyes. It's an insight into the underlying reality of things.
So it's not just about what you literally see with your eyes, but what you come to understand about it, the significance. That makes sense. And what about experiential perception? How does ḥāzâ work there?
Precisely. Understanding is key.
Yeah.
And then there's experiential perception, which is another fascinating application. ḥāzâ also carries the meaning to see in the sense of to have experienced.
Okay, like learning through living.
Exactly. This is evident in passages like Job 15.17, where Eliphaz claims, "What I have seen, I will declare." Or Job 24.1 and 27.12, where Job speaks of what he and his friends have seen. He's often referring not just to physical sights, but to the trials he has undergone, the observations of life he has made, and the truths he has apprehended through his suffering and life circumstances.
His lived reality.
Yes. This usage shows that gaining knowledge and wisdom through living, through encountering life's realities, both good and bad, can be described as a form of seeing. It's a compelling way to convey that deep understanding often comes not just from detached observation or intellectual pursuit, but from lived experience and personal encounter. It's a wisdom gained through personal history, through walking with God through trials.
That really broadens the meaning. And perhaps unexpectedly, you mentioned though it can even refer to selection or choice. That seems to move quite a bit from our initial understanding of seeing. How does that connect?
It is an interesting semantic leap, isn't it? But it highlights the practical application of sight, of perception. The core idea here, according to the sources, is that ḥāzâ can convey to select for oneself or to choose.
Okay.
This is understood as an extension of using sight for distinguishing objects, for discerning one thing from another based on careful observation and judgment. You use your eyes to pick something out.
Right. You look for specific qualities.
Exactly. A compelling example is in Exodus 18.21. Jethro instructs Moses to provide, ḥāzâ from ḥāzâ, from all the people men of ability. The word provide here translates from ḥāzâ. It indicates that Moses' task wasn't just to find any men, but to carefully see or discern those with the necessary qualities men who are capable, God-fearing, trustworthy, hating dishonest gain.
So it's discernment leading to action.
Precisely. It shows a practical application of the verb, where discerning sight, likely informed by wisdom and perhaps even divine guidance, leads directly to action and the careful choice of leaders for God's people. It's about spiritual perception applied to practical leadership selection.
Okay, that connection makes more sense now.
And finally, there's one more nuance worth mentioning. Looking with pleasure or satisfaction. This is often conveyed when ḥāzâ is followed by the preposition be.
The preposition changes the feel.
It seems to. When ḥāzâ is followed by be, the sources suggest it often means looking upon something with pleasure, satisfaction, or maybe even intensely with gratification. It adds this layer of affection or enjoyment to the act of seeing. It transforms it from maybe a neutral observation into an act of appreciation.
Can you give an example?
Sure. We see this in Psalm 27.4, where the psalmist expresses his one desire, to gaze lazod upon the beauty of the Lord, or his pleasantness in his temple. That's clearly a gaze of delight and worship.
A longing gaze.
Exactly. It's also used when beholding God's work with appreciation, as in Job 36.25, where Elihu speaks of men beholding God's work, implying admiration for the majesty of creation. Or even in a more personal context, intensely looking at a damsel in Song of Solomon 7.1. In these instances, the seeing is not neutral observation. It's an act of appreciation, delight, or profound engagement with what is being perceived. It speaks to a gaze of adoration, contentment, or focused attention driven by pleasure or satisfaction.
That really rounds out the picture. ḥāzâ is incredibly versatile.
It truly is.
Okay, to bring this all together, let's maybe look at how these concepts unfolded through biblical history. Put the figures and the terms on a kind of timeline. It might help us see the development. So, in the ancient period, the time of the patriarchs and Exodus, we see the early conceptual understanding of the root ḥāzâ, right?
Yes, that's where it starts.
It evolved from its basic meaning to include this deeper sense of behold and perceive with pleasure. This foundational understanding laid the groundwork for its more specialized uses later on, setting the stage for how God would communicate his truth. During this ancient era, we also find those striking descriptions of theophany, appearances of God. Exodus 24.11, as we discussed, powerfully describes certain men seeing God, a real encounter.
A unique event.
And Job 19.2627 gives us that profound, future-oriented application, where Job anticipates seeing God after death, separate from his flesh, a hope anchored in his Redeemer.
A crucial hope.
We also see early prophetic insights. Balaam in Numbers 24 is described as seeing a vision dūzamazeh. It indicates a divine vision given even to someone outside the covenant community in that instance.
Right, God's sovereignty extends everywhere.
And the term seer itself is ancient. 1 Samuel 9.9 explicitly states it was the older term for prophet, underscoring its long-standing connection to divine revelation right from the early days of Israel's monarchy.
Established early on.
And even Moses, early on in Exodus 18.21, uses dēzā in that sense of selecting men, showing that expanded meaning of discernment and choice already in action, his spiritual insight guiding his practical leadership decisions. These early instances really established the multifaceted nature of seeing as a key concept in God's dealings with humanity right from the start.
Absolutely. Then, as we move into the periods of the divided monarchy and the main prophetic era, think Isaiah, Amos, Micah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the connection between dēzā and divine revelation becomes even clearer, even more central to the biblical narrative.
This is when the big prophetic books are written.
Exactly. This was a time of intense spiritual and political turmoil for Israel and Judah, making the clarity and authority of God's word delivered through his prophets all the more vital. Prophets like Isaiah 1.1, Amos 1.1, and Micah 1.1 all explicitly see dēzā words or visions concerning Israel and Judah. This establishes the very nature of their calling. Their messages are not human insights. They are divinely granted perceptions. They aren't speaking their own opinions, but God's revealed will. However, as we noted, this era also brings those crucial warnings against false visions. Ezekiel 13 and Zechariah 10.2 speak forcefully against prophets who see vain things, or falsehood. This highlights the critical distinction between genuine revelation originating from God and dangerous deception. It underscores the vital need for discernment among God's people, testing the spirits.
Discerning truth from error.
Critically important. It's not enough to simply claim to see. The vision must originate from God, bearing his truth and authority, consistent with his previous revelation. This distinction becomes even more pronounced in messages of judgment, where prophets see a burden or see an oracle, ḥāzâ, like in Isaiah 13.1 and Habakkuk 1.1. That phrase itself conveys the weighty, often somber nature of the divine message they were compelled to deliver. They felt the gravity of God's impending judgment.
They carried that weight.
They did. And additionally, during this time, you still have passages, particularly in wisdom literature, like Job 15, 17, 24.1, 27.1, that speak of seeing in the sense of having experienced something. This shows the verb ḥāzâ continued to be used to describe knowledge gained through the course of one's life and trials, a wisdom forged in the crucible of experience, observing God's providence.
Okay, that brings us logically to the exilic and post-exilic periods. Daniel is obviously a key figure here. This era introduces that significant Aramaic influence and maybe a new dimension of apocalyptic visions, building on everything we've discussed but adapting to new circumstances and languages.
Right. In Daniel, the Aramaic verb ḥāzâ and its related nouns like dūzū and the word for dream, qiyam, are used very widely for seeing visions and dreams. This shows the continued centrality of seeing as the mode of divine communication, even as the language shifted within parts of the text and the nature of revelation often became more symbolic, more complex, looking further into the future. Daniel's unique role is often highlighted by his God-given ability to understand visions, tozon in Hebrew part, su in Aramaic, and dreams, lom or elam, as stated clearly in Daniel 1:17. This emphasizes a divinely granted capacity, a spiritual gift, to comprehend these revelations when they baffled even the wisest of the pagan world.
A gift for that specific time and purpose.
Exactly. Furthermore, the mystery, the rā's, referring to those divine secrets, is explicitly revealed to Daniel in a vision, a zoo, as we learned from Daniel 2.19, when God reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream and its meaning. This demonstrates again that seeing in this context isn't just observing images, but unlocking hidden divine truths about God's sovereign plan for history, otherwise completely concealed.
Okay, and what about Chronicles, written later?
Good point. In the books of Chronicles, written in this later, post-exilic period, the term seer continues to be used, often interchangeably with prophet. You see this with Gad, who is called David's seer in 1 Chronicles 21.9. This confirms the continuity of this concept, the divinely gifted individual who sees God's truth on behalf of the king or the people.
The role continued.
It did. And finally, figures like David and Moses are still designated as men of God in passages relating to worship and law found in Nehemiah 12.24 and Ezra 3.2. This reflects their established foundational role as recipients of revelation, showing a consistent thread of divine communication through chosen individuals across all the biblical eras. It highlights God's faithfulness in revealing himself and his will through the ages, culminating, of course, in Christ.
What an illuminating deep dive into this concept of seeing in the Old Testament. It's really remarkable. From simply beholding something, maybe with pleasure, to receiving a direct, life-altering, world-shaping message from the Most High. ḥāzâ and its related terms paint such a vibrant picture of how God communicates with his creation. It's clearly far more than just a physical act. It encompasses deep understanding, spiritual discernment, experiential knowledge, and the awesome responsibility of receiving divine truth.
It really shows us that God reveals himself and his will in diverse ways. Through powerful visions, significant dreams, sometimes direct appearances, and through the discerning perception he grants to his chosen agents, the prophets, the seers, the men of God.
Yeah.
And the precision of these ancient Hebrew and Aramaic words, it just provides such clarity about the multifaceted nature of divine revelation. It speaks volumes about God's intentionality and communication and his deep desire for humanity as covenant people to truly apprehend his truth and live by it.
So as you, our listeners, go about your day, maybe ponder this. If seeing, in the biblical sense, means not just observing what is physically present, but also understanding deep truths, experiencing weighty realities, discerning God's hand, and even receiving divine messages, what might it mean for you to truly see the workings of God in our world today through his word and spirit?
That's the question. Consider how God might be revealing truths to you. Perhaps not through grand dramatic visions like those given to Isaiah or Daniel, but certainly through the illumination of his word by the Holy Spirit, through the wisdom you receive from godly counsel and your own experiences walking in faith, and through the spiritual discernment you exercise in your daily walk with him. These are also valid biblical forms of God, making himself and his will known, inviting you to see his hand and his faithfulness in every aspect of your life.
Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking, the deep dive. We trust this exploration has equipped you with some valuable insights into God's word.